Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. As many of you know, I'm extremely interested in the sports business and how it's changed over time. And I'm now very interested to introduce you to Chris Overholt. Chris is President and CEO of the Overactive Media Group, which sounds like just a fascinating name. And he's got an incredible history. He was Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Olympic Committee from May 2010 to September 2018. He was Vice President, Chief Marketing Officer for the Miami Dolphins and the Sun Life Stadium. He was Executive VP Business Operations for the Florida Panthers. And he was Vice President, Sales and Service for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So he's got a long history in sports. And his company, Overactive Media, is an esports, a global esports and entertainment organization that combines franchise team ownership with audience engagement to connect fans, franchise partners, and corporate sponsors around the world and in North America. They own the Toronto Defiant of the Overwatch League, OWL, and the Toronto Ultra of the Call of Duty League. And in Europe, they operate three teams as well. They're a founding partner in B-Side Inc. and a franchise holder in the Flashpoint CSGO League. Chris, thanks for joining us. What a background.
That's quite
an amazing background.
Yeah, well, thank you. I've been very fortunate. I've worked for some great organizations and some great leaders, so I feel very fortunate. Thank you.
Well, let's talk about some of the background in the past, but today's topic is esports. Tell us, what the heck is esports?
Yeah, well, imagine, I don't know if you were, whether you played video games when you and I were young. Video games weren't nearly as well developed, certainly, as they are today. But
hey, come on! I was pinball machines in places. There was no video games alive at that time. It was all like the little toggles.
That's right. Yeah, for me it was Pong. I do have a very vivid memory of Pong. But of course, video gaming industry globally has changed quite considerably, and in those ways, it's actually no different than sport as you and I have understood it over our lifetime. You know, what kids enjoy doing today, beyond, sport like hockey and baseball, there's a whole generation of kids who just think differently about what sport means to them. And some of them, a good number of them, think about video games expressed at the highest level. At a high performance level, some of these games are thought of by a whole generation of young people as sport themselves. So Overwatch, League of Legends, now more recently Call of Duty, the other game you mentioned, CSGO or Counter-Strike Global Offensive. These are all game titles that have been among the biggest in the world for, in some cases, close to 20 years. But there are a whole generation of kids who think of these games played at the highest level as sport. And so that's the business we're in.
And so what is Overactive Media?
So the best way I can probably describe that is to say to you that what we believe we're building is a 21st century sports media and entertainment company that in many ways is no different than Madison Square Garden or Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. We own franchises that play in the biggest and most important leagues in the world. We build content. We build shoulder brands that, and fan clubs that wrap around the edges of these core brands that are our teams. And in the not so distant future, we'll be purveyors of a new entertainment venue here in the city that we're really excited about. So again, all of those things are elements of any pro sports team, any pro sport organization. And there is not another organization in the world today that has the franchise holdings that we have. And all of this born over the last couple of years as we've waded into this global ecosystem. So it's exciting.
Fantastic. And what is this entertainment center that you're going to be launching?
Yeah, so so years ago, as you mentioned, I worked for Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. And in those years, I was on that executive team that helped stand up those two franchises inside the Air Canada Centre, as it was then known. It was a big effort for us as the then Raptors to take the steps that we did to get a shovel in the ground and get started on a new facility, one that eventually the Maple Leafs came and purchased and merged up our two organizations to become Maple Leaf Sports. So as we got going in this enterprise in the fall of 2018, I almost in passing mentioned to our board and to our principal investor, Mike Kimmel, and his family, that if we're going to own esport franchises in Toronto, we should own the venue that they play in. And Mike took that very seriously. And over some months has managed to acquire a tranche of land down on the exhibition grounds. that we feel we can build a brand new facility on, one that would all at once be the home for esports de facto here in Canada, but certainly the home to our two franchises here in Toronto. But maybe as importantly to its business and ours, be a home for entertainment, the great acts that come through this city that otherwise can't be accommodated at Scotiabank Arena. You know, Maple Leaf Sports is a victim of their own success in some regards. Those guys are conflicted out because those teams are so great. You know, more than 100 nights a year, that venue's not available to play home to great other entertainment acts and corporate events and so on. So we think there's a business enterprise wrapped around a 6,000 to 8,000 seat venue, and we're working every day to make sure that's a reality for Toronto in the coming future.
Well, it's very exciting. Let's take a break and come back more with Chris Overholt of the Overactive Media Group in just a minute and learn some more about esports. Stay with us. We're back with Chris Overholt, the president and CEO of the Overactive Sports Media Company that is an esports company. They own a couple of franchises here in Canada and a couple of franchises in Europe. Why in Canada and in Europe?
Yeah, well, as I've alluded to already, these business models are not too dissimilar to those like our friends at Maple Leaf Sports are invested in. We were given the opportunity in the Overwatch League in 2018 and then the Call of Duty League in 2019 to buy the franchise slots, and that's the way they're positioned. They're sold as city-based franchises. They're sold with a protected region around them in similar fashion to a hockey team or a basketball team. And of course, you know, this is our home city. This is where we make our home in business and in life. And so naturally, we wanted to take hold of the Toronto marketplace and de facto the Canadian marketplace. The opportunities in Europe, again, were more driven by the business model than they were the locations. We have a European-based operation out of Madrid. We have teams that play in Berlin and also out of Denmark. These teams are, again, in part of a bigger business model that looks and feels like an NHL or an NBA model. So it's less about the location, it's more about the model itself. And to be clear, those models are ones that are really the only ones that make sense to us. These are business models that share revenue with us, that as these leagues do new partnership deals, new media deals, we get to share in the enterprise growth of those leagues and in all of the financial support that they're able to garner for them. So again, when we think about the way the NHL, the NFL, the NBA has grown over years, this is the very same model that we're invested in. In fact, it's the only one that we choose to invest in. The global ecosystem for esports and competitive gaming is huge. There are teams and leagues all over the world, but the only ones that have a business model that makes sense to us are those that we're engaged in.
And when you say you want a franchise, you say you've got a geographical location and you've got a team. Who's on the team?
Yeah, so you know, it's interesting. The global high performance piece of gaming is made up of largely young men. There are some women that play in different leagues, but largely young men. These are young people that have literally honed their skills for typically a period of 5 or 6 years from the time they're in their early teens and growing up into their early 20s. What's really interesting about this group is they're typically on the downside of their career by the time they're 24 or 25, because just physiologically, their skills, it's a physical expression of a cognitive ability. And all of us physiologically are on the downside of that hill by the time we get to be in our mid-20s. So these are typically young men who just play the game at the highest level in the world. And, think about a Call of Duty league. It has 4 or 5 players per team. There's only 12 teams in this league. It's a global league. So these are arguably the best 60 players of Call of Duty in the world that play in this league.
Okay, so if it's Call of Duty League, how do I watch it?
Yeah, so it depends on the game, but in the case of Call of Duty and Overwatch, both of those leagues are broadcast on YouTube. So the initial deal for Overwatch in 2017 was actually a deal on a platform called Twitch, which many of those who follow esports would know well. That media rights deal then moved over to Google and YouTube last year for the first time. But those deals are meaningful. Those rights deals for Call of Duty and for Overwatch combined are, somewhere in the order of 150 to 200 million dollars over several years. So again, when you think about the business model that we're invested in, that's what's so compelling. This is a global audience that's native digital and scales in the same way. And of course, the fans of these games and the fans of these esports are also the ones that the brands around the world are most compelled and interested to get to. So whether you're McDonald's or Coke or Skip the Dishes or Universal Music, you're thinking about how you get to these Gen Y and Gen Zs, and you're trying to figure out the most effective way to do it, or many of them are ad blockers and cord cutters. Esports is one of those solutions. And again, for those reasons, we feel pretty excited to be in the position we're in.
So instead of me watching Hockey Night in Canada on a mainline TV station and seeing a beer commercial, this is 20-something and teenagers that are on their computer on YouTube watching Call of Duty League and watching similar commercials.
That's right. And to give you some sense of the audiences, the peak audience for the Overwatch Championship, which just happened this past weekend, was 15 million people.
Holy moly, that's better than some of the professional sports got.
15 million people. The unit measurement that Nielsen uses to measure esports is the average minute audience, meaning the total audience number in any given minute of that broadcast. And that average minute audience number for that championship was 1.5 million people. To give you a sense of League of Legends, which is the biggest esport game in the world today, League of Legends, the World Championships that will happen later this month, these tournaments, these games are routinely played in front of a global audience of 100 million people or more. These are numbers that rival the Super Bowl. And so you can imagine as a brand or as an invested franchise owner in one of these leagues who gets to share in the quantification of those fans, in the revenue per fan. Those are pretty compelling numbers.
And more global than any of the professional sports?
Yeah, by their very nature. So Overwatch, for example, has 4 teams in China, has a team in Seoul, Korea, 1 in London, and the balance in North America. There's 2 teams in Europe in Call of Duty right now. And we play, our League of Legends franchise actually plays in the European League. So we play with 10 other teams based in Europe. So again, these game titles, esport followings, and their fans are by their nature global.
Now, if I go to the sports pages in the local newspaper and I see NHL, NBA, am I going to see esports rankings for the leagues as well?
I don't think it'll be so long from now, Brian. And the reason I say that with confidence is because you're already seeing it. So again, for those of your listeners who watch, for example, TSN routinely, you would see them starting to cover esports more and more online and starting to creep into their broadcast. Strictly speaking, not in their sports reporting today, but it is present on virtually all of their media channels now. One of our principal investors in Overactive Media is, in fact, Bell Canada Enterprises. They own just slightly less than 5% of Overactive Media. And the reason that's true is because they see the same potential in that audience that we do. And of course, that's the next generation for their 5G products and their Bell 5 products and so on. So a fully integrated media company like Bell represents, of course, would be interested in that audience and that following.
How does the recruitment of players happen? Do you have a draft like pro sports?
It's interesting. So there's no draft per se because there's no graduating system, right? There's starting to, some shape is starting to be given to the NCAA, and there are scholarships now available for esport athletes in many schools around the world, including in the US. But there's no graduating system that moves them through a process. So most of our scouting, frankly, gets done online, but candidly, it's quite easy to do because all of these games are played, again, on a digital platform that is easy to quantify. All the analytics are driven out of the game performance inherently because of the way it's built. So it's easy for us as a league and as teams in the league to identify the top players in the world just by looking at their analytics inside their game performance.
And you've got Toronto franchises. Do you recruit Toronto players or players from around the world?
Yeah, in fact, this year, our Overwatch franchise started the season with 2 Canadians. By the end, only one. We moved one of those players out, but there's an emerging market for Canadian players, and one naturally that you would assume we would want to develop, right? Our players, if Canadian, and more particularly if they're from Toronto, ideally, they're more relatable to our fans. They're more relatable, of course, to our marketing partners. So all of those things do matter. As the league and the global system matures, there'll be more available for us to choose from. Depending on the game, Call of Duty, for example, produces largely American and European players. Overwatch tends to produce more high caliber Asian players. In the case of League of Legends, it's a mix of all of them, in fact. But again, a global league produces global talent, so we're always on the lookout.
And do you have long-term contracts? Do you have free agency? Do you have revenue share? How does it work?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned already, the revenue share is real, and each of those leagues that we participate in do share revenue with us. The long-term contract is a great question, and it's an interesting time because all of them are maturing in their own way. League of Legends is an esport that's been played now for more than 10 years. And so those players tend to command more money and tend to command longer term commitments. All of our players on our European team right now around League of Legends were on 3-year contracts beginning this year. All of them rookies at 18 years old.
Unbelievable.
In Call of Duty, they tend to be a little bit older, and that game's really just emerging as a new esport in a mainstream way. And so we did 1+1 in the case of all of those players. So 1 year plus a club option. Again, for the reasons I mentioned related to that cognitive ability and that physical expression of that cognitive ability, you don't want to get too committed to a player for too long. Plus, these games change, and what it means to be successful in some of these games as you go along changes. The strategy necessary to be successful as a player changes. The publishers and the leagues morph that a little bit as they go along. And so, again, players who are physically and mentally well and highly adaptive are the ones that have the longest careers.
And what about you and your management team? You've got an incredible career with the Florida Panthers and Miami Dolphins and Toronto Maple Leafs. Is that typical of your management team?
Well, one of the advantages of being the old guy with the gray hair is that you also have had the advantage of having met great people along the way. And we do have a great team. And I think it's a real comment on our ownership group. We have a long view to this industry. And so we've taken a long view to our senior team as well. We've got leaders that are, in most cases, in the middle of their career. They've been accomplished and successful in other places. In our case, typically either in sports marketing or in big brands that are attached to sports marketing. So some of these are folks that were with us at the Olympic Committee and others that I've known around the Canadian scene for a while. We've also got a couple of really, really highly qualified packaged goods marketers who were previously attached to Nike and Google. So some really great experience in it. I like to think it sets us apart globally. Many of these companies that exist today in the esports space have grown up out of the industry. And so some of them are run by, like it used to be years ago in the NHL, some of them are run by former players, players who graduate into the front office and then are running the business. In our case, we've got business experts who have packaged goods and sports marketing experience. And again, I like to think that's going to be the difference for us long term.
We're chatting tonight with Chris Overholt, who's the president and CEO of Overactive Media, a company that specializes in esports. We're going to take a break and come back more with Chris, and I'm going to ask him about COVID-19 and changes in the marketplace, and is this going to destroy professional sports, etc. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I come to you every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM, or you can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. I'm going to have to figure out how to get on some esports media channels, obviously. And maybe Chris Overholt, the president CEO of Overactive Media Group, after he's told us all about the esports, can give us some suggestions. Actually, Chris, you might find it interesting. I went to a speech by someone who is in one of the cutting edge video editing systems. And I asked her after she talked about how video was going to take over the internet, what I should do on AM radio. And she said, what? AM radio?
All right.
So you were president of the Canadian Olympic Committee. Is that correct?
I was the CEO. Our president is actually our board chair.
Okay, so you're CEO of the Canadian Olympic Committee. Is esports going to be in the Olympics?
I think so. There's, it's really, for me, it's a matter of when, not if. There's a couple of things that I think contribute to that. First of all, again, we've already watched the IOC start to pay some close attention to this. They've already run what I'll call exhibitions around the edges of Olympic Games. My last Olympic Games was Pyeongchang in Korea, and they ran in the days leading up to those games, they ran a StarCraft tournament, another great game title, and actually the tournament was won by a young Canadian woman. But again, the IOC, for all the same reasons that brands might be interested in esport, the IOC is equally interested. They have to be constantly thinking about how they adapt their sport program to suit the next generation of fans. The best example I can think of that would be, years ago when they modified the winter sport program to adapt to some of the X Games disciplines that have been developed under that title. And of course, those are now some of the best elements of the Winter Games that, especially in Canada, we enjoy and compete in quite well. So again, the IOC has been paying attention. They've struck a working group in the last year that has been working cooperatively with members of the global ecosystem in esports. And so there's ongoing work being done and conversations being had inside the IOC. The other thing that's happened in just the last year is an international federation has cropped up around the idea of convening a conversation for international sport around esport. I'm a board member on an organization called the Global Esport Federation, based in Singapore. And this is a collection of people at the board table that are made up of traditional sport people, Olympic sport folks, and esport people, and all of them leaders in their space, and all of them working hard every day to convene a global conversation around the collision of sport and esport. And so whether that's a game title like League of Legends, or how soccer, or more quizzically archery, finds its way into an esport expression. And I think it's really, again, this group is plugged in well to the IOC as well, and operating against a framework that would make sense, led by values and principles of sport and so on. So I think it's when you start to think about what the future of Olympic sport might be, and the pressures that exist on it as it goes to building of venues and hosting of games generally, virtual sport and esports more broadly that can be experienced by fans and players alike at distance is obviously an interesting part of the conversation. LA, I think, might be the last true, traditional expression of esports or of Olympic sport as you and I have come to know it growing up. And equally, I think it might be the case that LA adapts its sport program to play host to esports as part of its official program. So we'll see, but I would say I'm optimistic.
Is esports going to kill live sports?
Well, kill's a fairly aggressive word, but I do think faster than most anybody might realize, I think we will find that it takes a place alongside of traditional sports. Again, quicker than most might think. And, again, you would know this in your experience in professional sport, Brian. I mean, the challenge in those early days of selling out the Raptors on a Tuesday night, or the challenge when I was in Florida of trying to sell, even a Thursday night game to the Nashville Predators in those days when they were still trying to make the playoffs. Those are symptoms of a larger problem, which is, how traditional sport competes with, frankly, the currency of people's time, and how another generation of fans consume media and entertainment differently than you and I did. And, football is even a good example of that. When I was at the Dolphins, we would put 10 home games on sale right out of the gate, and we would typically sell 4 or 5 of them. And then we would struggle to fill that 75,000 seat stadium for 10 dates to make sure that we were on air. That's in large part for a collection of reasons, but not the least of which is people enjoy watching and keeping track of their fantasy football on a big screen at home where the car can easily be parked and the beer's cheaper. Some of those same things contribute to the notion of esports taking on popularity, where there's a whole generation of kids who aren't prepared to give up more time than need be, who can consume what they love on their screens from the comfort of their own homes. And maybe as importantly, while they're doing it, they can be talking to their friends who are also fans and real-time texting with each other on a platform that gives them profile. It's just a completely different experience. And the numbers are staggering, and they're global, and it's native digital, so it scales faster. So all of those things combined, I think, put this on a very incredible and a very steep arc. And probably, again, before we even realize it, and it's already been true. I mean, on any given Sunday in the first year of the Overwatch League, you might have flipped by ABC on a Sunday afternoon only to notice that the Overwatch League was on your television set. So it's all around us, and it's growing every day. And so I do think it has a place in the conversation.
So I go to a hockey game with my son, and I'm cheering for the local team, and I'm watching 100% of the game. And my son is glued to some electronic device, and he's got his fantasy hockey league. Yep. And he says his is more challenging because in my situation, I'm rooting for the same team all the time. Loyal to them. And he's saying, but you're reliant on that general manager and that coach to make all the right decisions. I'm my own general manager. I pick my players, and I get to effectively coach them. And if they're no good, I get rid of them and I trade them away. So I'm my own general manager. I'm my own coach, and I'm my own scorekeeper effectively, because you just look at what the score is, and I got to do this complicated calculation to try to figure out how I'm going to win the game. And you're competing with your friends on the same team. Typically, I'm competing against my friends because we each got different teams. Right. So is he right that his fantasy hockey is actually more challenging and interesting than my real hockey?
Well, having never played fantasy hockey, I don't know that I can comment on that, but I can tell you based on what you just described, it certainly sounds so. The underlying piece of all of what you just described is how engaged he is in all of it. How involved he is in the process of communicating and making decisions in it. It is the gamification of a sport that he loves. And he gets to do it cooperatively with his friends, and he gets to trash talk him the whole time if he wants, right, on a platform that allows him to do that. And that's really maybe one of the best parallels I've heard, Brian, for hockey as compared to esport. All of those things are the underpinnings of esports. All of those things allow a generation of kids different than our own, or different than we were when we were young, to just think about the games that they love differently. And, I'll give you another example. If growing up, I'm guessing you played hockey. I certainly know that you played football. If growing up, you would have had the opportunity to watch your heroes give you a video lesson on your television about a certain skill. Maybe it's Bobby Orr teaching us how to take the best wrist shot, or, any one of the football heroes that you would have coveted a young man growing up. If you had the opportunity to have that in-home experience, and more than that, to do it with your friends and talk about it real time, we would have died for that. That opportunity is available to all the fans of esports every day when they can go online on YouTube and Twitch and watch their heroes play and give them real-time advice about how to be successful inside of a game. It's that engagement that drives it. And that's what we're excited about in our business.
So if you were back at Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment or at the Miami Dolphins, confronted with this new esports, what would you do?
I would have told them to buy a franchise. We're in this business not just on our own. The Crafts are invested in the Overwatch League. They own the Boston Uprising. The Wilpons own the New York team. For those who don't know on this call, the Wilpons own the New York Mets. The Wilfs in Minnesota own the Call of Duty team. The Cronkies and the Anschutz, who own multiple sports franchises, including the likes of the LA Rams and the Arsenal Group and the LA Kings, they're invested in these leagues with us. The reason we were so excited to get our arms around the franchises that we acquired is because all of the traditional sports owners that have been so successful in these leagues that we have grown to love, they all see the same thing that we do. For them, it's at least a hedge on the assets that they already have. But the average age of an NFL fan is north of 50 years old. The average age of a Major League Baseball fan, north of 50 years old. And hockey and basketball aren't that much further behind. So if you're in the pro sport business and you're not thinking about the next generation of fan, then you're missing the mark. And I think for those reasons, some of those bigger names are invested with us in these leagues.
COVID-19 sounds like it's probably been helpful to your business.
Yeah, I think it has. It's a terrible circumstance we're all dealing with, of course. But I think whatever curve this has been on, it's accelerated it. So whatever trajectory, it's probably a little steeper and quicker now. You know, I think the same could be said for platforms like Amazon Prime and Netflix as well. I mean, if you give yourself over to the idea that entertainment, at least for the predictable future, is going to largely emanate from your home, then of course gaming and esport consumption and media consumption generally are bound to go up. So I think we have benefited from that. Certainly the audience numbers that we've seen in the leagues that we participate in have gone up year over year. That Overwatch League number, that championship weekend number I just shared with you, I think that was up over 150% year over year. It's been true for League of Legends as well, close to 100% growth in fan audience numbers. So yeah, I think we have benefited, but equally our business for Call of Duty and for Overwatch is a live event business. So most people wouldn't have recognized this, but we put our first live event on sale where the Overwatch League team, Toronto Defiant, we're going to be playing here in Toronto this summer. We were set to play at Roy Thompson Hall. We had sold out 3,000 seats, and that's our business model. Our business model is to create a live event experience around our esports teams in this market in the future. And I expect at this point that we'll get back to that in earnest in 2022. And that's why we're so excited about building this entertainment venue, because it'll be our home to do just that.
So bottom line from our conversation, I got to stop complaining about my son spending too much time on his video games. Is that correct?
Yes. And he needs to make sure that he stays physically fit and well, because we both know what the benefit of those experiences are growing up.
If people want to check out some of your teams, how do they most easily do that?
Yeah, probably the best understanding and expression comes through YouTube, which of course is a VOD platform. So you can go and check out Toronto Ultra or Toronto Defiant on YouTube and get a real sense of what it's like. For those looking at it the first time, it'll be hard to follow. But as you watch it more, it becomes more normalized for our brains and for our older eyes. And it can be really exciting.
Chris Overholt, CEO of the Overactive Media Group. Great name. I should have asked you why that name came about. Thank you so much for telling us about esports. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for the time today. Good to see you.
That's our show for tonight. Thank you, Chris, for joining us, and thank all of you for joining us. Really appreciate it. Tune in tomorrow on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. Good night.